Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome once again to the CEC EduSet live lecture. Dear friends, in continuation to our previous lecture which was on post-modern empire, today we are going to discuss about the economy during the Gupta period, and for this we have again with us in our studios Dr. Shankar Kumar. He is assistant professor in Hindu College Department of History. So first of all I would like to welcome Dr. Shankar Kumar to this EduSet lecture of ours, and sir, over to you now.
Thank you, Geetika, and good afternoon to my viewers. As Geetika said, this lecture is in continuation to the previous lectures that we have had on ancient Indian history, which covered the Mauryan period, the administration part of it, then the society and economy. So subsequent to that period in chronological terms is the post-Mauryan phase, which is characterized by the rise of small states and unprecedented activities in terms of trade and commerce, monetization. So we have the kind of coins that we are so familiar with coming for the first time in ancient Indian history. Although in the previous period we had medium of exchange in the form of punch-marked coins, but they were not quite like the way we are familiar with the coins, that is round coins with portraits of the king as mark of sovereignty and so forth, with something inscribed on it and so forth. So these are some of the developments that characterize the post-Mauryan period. And subsequent to that is the period that is referred to in history as the period of the Guptas. Of course, the label, as we would see, is something that needs to be contested in order to facilitate a better understanding of as to what the economy and the dynamics of economics is all about. So we shall today be confining our discussion to the economic changes which characterize this period, that is the Gupta period. In chronological terms, when we say Gupta period, one should understand of the period say from 320 AD to around the middle of the 6th century AD. So it is this period that we shall be talking about today in terms of economic changes. As all of you must be familiar with in terms of the political understanding of the Guptas, that they quite recreated a kind of pan-Indian to some extent empire, which was somewhat missing in the period immediately following the Mauryan period. So there is some kind of the presence of a state which covered a greater part of what Indian subcontinent today is all about. Of course, the kind of polity that was practiced in different parts of the Indian subcontinent is contested by several historians who argue in terms of the advent of feudalization tendencies in the Gupta period. Nevertheless, in terms of departure from the earlier period, that is post-Mauryan period, of course, this was significant. And it is this trajectory that we shall be tracing today in terms of economy. Now, here is the scheme of our discussion today that you can see on your slide. Gupta economy, we shall first be trying to discuss whether this label is appropriate or whether this label is right. Then we shall be talking about the contextualization of economy in ancient India. This is just to facilitate, this is just to bring about a kind of perspective in which we need to understand the economy of this period. We shall be just talking about the stages in which the ancient Indian economy has been understood till around the Gupta period, and thereafter we shall be taking it up for detailed discussion. Then the segments that we would be covering in our discussion today would be agriculture, as you can very well make out that economy covers these segments: agriculture, craft and artisanal activities, trade and exchange, and also monetization, that is coins, and to what extent it was very strong, increasing or declining. So that is what we shall be covering in terms of the scope of our discussion under economy. And then just in order to sum up, in order to understand and analyze our discussion, we shall be talking of the feudalization debate, which is a very good entry point, so to say, in order to understand the dynamics of the socio-economic changes during this period. Because quite a few historians do argue that this was the period which led to the entry of feudal tendencies in Indian history. We have another set of scholars who contest this, and we shall be talking about these differing perspectives. So, let's come to the first aspect of our discussion today, and that is Gupta economy, the label. Generally, it is part of the general parlance, usual parlance, that we tend to say Gupta economy. Now, Gupta here stands for a political dynasty, and that is where we need to understand that usually in history, and this is almost a kind of loose legacy from the past, the way history is bracketed in terms of chronology, we tend to capture even the social and economic changes under the same political or dynastic appellations. Now, this is something which is very much questioned by the scholars today, because now we understand that the rhythm of economy, or for that matter even society, is not always congruous with that of political changes. So, it's not as if there is a change in the dynasty and therefore there should necessarily be a change in society and economy as well. So, in order to dispel this kind of a wrong connotation of such labels, we are bringing this for discussion. So, instead of saying Gupta economy, we should rather be surveying the economy or the state of economy during the Gupta period, because all the levers of economic changes are not governed or captured or dictated by political powers, however centralized or not so centralized they might be, as we see in the case of Gupta period itself, that state policies have some bearing, of course, on the rhythm of economy, but that is not about 100% of the understanding of economy during that period. So, this was just a kind of a brief kind of a qualification to our discussion today. Then, let's come to the first substantive part of our discussion today, contextualizing Gupta economy in ancient India. And in this, we shall just be briefly touching upon all the stages through which ancient economy had traversed till the time it reached the Gupta period. So, we have of course, if we can set aside the prehistoric phases, that is Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic phases of ancient Indian history, then we have the emergence of the first Bronze Age empire in the form of Harappan civilization around 2500 BC, which continued up to 1700 BC, so to say, and thereafter the geographical locus somewhat shifts to northwestern part of this subcontinent and also the upper Gangetic plains, where we have the arrival of the Vedic period. And here the economic trajectory is again somewhat not very continuous in terms of what we had in the case of the Harappans. So, we have pastoral economy characterizing the Rigvedic period, and gradually as the Vedic society pervaded in the greater part of northern India, in the middle Gangetic plains and so forth, by the time we come to the later Vedic period or the terminal point of the later Vedic period, say around 600 BC, we find that agricultural economy had again come to characterize this area. And 6th century BC is the axial period of ancient Indian history. It is the most, you can say, transformative century of the ancient Indian period, where we have the emergence, so to say, re-emergence, one can say, if we take into account the urban phase of the Harappan period. So we have second urbanization, second phase of urbanization. We have emergence of Mahajanpads. 16 Mahajanpads is the usual way in which we understand it. And there is intensification of trade, commerce, coins make its entry for the first time as medium of exchange, metallic coins in the form of punch-marked coins. So this is also the period of great philosophical upheaval, so to say, or resurgence. Heterodox sects which somewhat contested the Brahmanical notions in the form of Buddhism and Jainism, they came to characterize this period. And subsequent to that, in continuation to that, where the agricultural economy had held its sway and the monarchical form of governance became the form of polity in ancient India, overshadowing the other forms like republican and other confederate states. So by the time we reach the Mauryan period, that is around 4th, 3rd century BC, we have the emergence of the empire like a structure in political sense, and disintegration of the Mauryan Empire again gave rise to smaller states in terms of polity and very vigorous economic exchange, even overseas trade with the Roman world and other parts of Indian subcontinent. So this is the period which constitutes the immediate backdrop to the coming of the Gupta period. And from here on, when we look at the Gupta period, now we need to understand as to how economic changes characterized this period. Now, as we had decided in the scheme of our discussion, as we had discussed earlier, referring to our first slide, the first segment that we would be talking of is agriculture. Of course, there are other segments of economy that we had already outlined. Now, in agriculture, we shall be covering the practice of land grants. Of course, land grants is not something which started around this time, but definitely the implications and the typology of land grants, the character of the land grants definitely had changed around this time. Then we have as a, you can say, consequence, partially consequence of these practices, emergence of small farms and units of agricultural production. So instead of very big farms, now we have smaller units of agrarian production. So we shall be talking about that. Expansion of agricultural production and also its intensification. So even in qualitative terms, so if we grew a few number of crops, in this period, in the Gupta period, we find more number of crops, more varieties of crops being produced. So that is yet another aspect that we shall be touching upon as part of our discussion on agriculture. Then consequent to this practice of land grants, we have the emergence of landed intermediaries. And landed intermediaries are important in the context of the emergence of feudalism, as you would understand. So we shall be touching upon that also. And of course, the increased pressure on land. Now, let's understand one thing, that land grants conventionally in India was not something which began during the Gupta period. It was a practice even in earlier times, but in earlier period, before the Guptas, essentially these land grants were made by the ruling class or the royalty to religious bodies, religious beneficiaries, and the chief intent of such land grants was to acquire merit for themselves and for their forefathers, and also to gain fair bit of legitimacy from these religious bodies, essentially Brahmins, and also Buddhist and Jain monasteries and so forth. So that was the practice till around this time. But what was new around Gupta period that we get to see in terms of the land grants is that now it was not only confined to the religious bodies, but even secular entities. And when I say secular, it means people who had been given land, and this particularly happened during the later and post-Gupta period, that even those people, maybe officials, or on account of some compulsions to some people, lands were granted not only by the monarch but also by other elite, other ruling elite, who would not themselves participate in the process of production, but would just keep off this process of production. Therefore, we have emergence of a band of intermediaries which subsisted on agricultural produce without actually participating in it in a big way. So it created multiple kinds of rights over the same piece of land, and that is what created a lot of pressure on the existing land masses around the period that we are talking of, particularly towards the end of the Gupta period and the period subsequent to that. Now, what these land grants, once we survey this, once we study the details of these land grants, it emerges that it also led to fragmentation of the farmland. We get to hear of the Mauryan and pre-Mauryan period where huge farms were cultivated by, say, hired laborers or even slaves and so forth. But here, in the Gupta and later Gupta period, we find the reference of smaller farms, and the donations which are being made or the land grants which are being made are also not huge pieces, huge tracts of land. And that tells us that there is something happening in terms of fragmentation, in terms of the ownership of land, and that is what is creating smaller pieces of or smaller units of production. So this is a big change that we get to see in the Gupta period in terms of economy, particularly in agriculture. Now, alongside this, we should also keep in mind that these land grants are not only triggered by the sense of acquiring religious merit, but also on account of some administrative and political compulsions. We get to hear of the Kali age crisis around this time. Professor R.S. Sharma talks about the implications of Kali age crisis, where he says that whatever references that we get in Puranas and other texts about the Kali age is essentially, if we decode that in terms of its implication on economics, it is about the inability of the state to garner enough revenue from its subjects. So it could be the Vaishyas and the Shudras who are the chief taxpayers in terms of social groups. Now, they perhaps are refusing, or they are not very easily paying up the revenue to the state, paying up the taxes, and that creates a kind of a pressure on the royal revenue, leading to giving or ceding these revenue rights, or ceding the land in terms of revenue extraction and several other provisions to some beneficiaries. It could be state officials, it could be religious bodies and so forth. And that created some bit of autonomous pockets of not only in terms of fiscal parts, but also in terms of administrative parts, and subsequently, this was not to begin with, but subsequently even punitive parts. So what we get to see by the end of the Gupta period is that even the administrative and punitive rights, which were the mark of sovereignty, even that were given away as part of land grants. Also important is the fact, as we can see on our slide as third point, that these land grants led to also expansion and intensification of agricultural production. What we mean here is that once a land is donated to a beneficiary, that beneficiary is supposed to have made the donated land fit for agriculture by introducing agriculture, by introducing crops, new crops, and thereby making it fit for habitation. Quite a few of the land grants in the Gupta period were made in uninhabited land also. So those areas which were not under cultivation to begin with, those areas, those pockets were given as land grants to some Brahmins or other religious bodies, Brahmaday grants and so forth. And this is how new areas were brought under the vortex of agriculture. Alongside, we also have some grants which were made in the populated areas. How do we get to know this is through the details of the land grants, where it is said that this particular land grant is made to so and so person or so and so body, and this piece of information is shared with other inhabitants and other local officials and so forth, which implies that there were people living in the vicinity of the area that has been granted. Now, another category of land grants is where the local inhabitants are also enjoined upon to work on that piece of land with some provisions, and they were immune from the entry of royal forces and revenue extraction and so forth. So the donees were expected to introduce agriculture, and they would extract the rent or taxes, and they would retain it with themselves, and that's how a sense of autonomy is also very much entwined with the idea of such land grants made under the compulsion of Kali age crisis and so forth. So this is what we need to understand, and the positive part was that a bigger part of the ancient of the Indian subcontinent was getting brought under cultivation, which was kind of assured means of surplus production, which could sustain more population and so forth. Now, increased pressure on land is something that we have already alluded to earlier, is that once these land grants are made to some beneficiaries, and if these beneficiaries are not partaking in the process of agricultural process or in the process of agricultural production, then it is ceded to other people, and that's how a band of non-participating agriculturalists is created, and that is what is referred to in terms of landlordism, and that is something which is a direct implication of these land grants, and that created extra pressure on the same piece of land, because it is the same, it is the taxes generated or the surplus generated from the same piece of land which is being used to sustain these people in addition to the actual tillers. So it also led to the erosion of the traditional tenancy rights, and several other implications followed from this kind of a development. But overall, it is this scenario that we get to see in terms of changes in the realm of agriculture. Now, when we say expansion and intensification, one should take note of the fact that greater part of the Deccan area today, or subsequently even the southern part of Indian or the southern part of Indian subcontinent or the peninsular India, were brought under agriculture. This is not to say that it all followed from the practice of land grants which emanated from North India, but there were some indigenous forces and changes already happening in this area. But definitely such practices all the more amplified the process of transformation towards agriculture. And by the end of the Gupta period, a greater part of the Indian subcontinent had definitely been stabilized in terms of economic pursuit by resorting to agriculture for their sustenance. So this is something that is important for us to understand. Now, having surveyed the scenario in agriculture, let's now come to the other component of economy, and that is craft and artisanal production. Now, when we say craft and artisanal production, please be mindful of the fact that already we had a continuous trajectory of craft and artisanal production happening in a big way ever since 6th century BC in ancient India. And institutions like guilds had been important in the period, in the earlier period also, but definitely in this period we find that guilds, or the shrenis as they are referred to in the ancient Indian sources, emerge as more powerful, so much so that we get to hear of Shreni Bal, which is indicative of some kind of military power under, or military resource under these trade and artisan guilds. They also are probably issuing coins and perhaps are also organizing production at the local level. Now, this is something that had been the practice till the Mauryan times. But from the post-Mauryan period and the Gupta period, of course, it is the royalty which minted coins as mark of their sovereignty. Nevertheless, it does seem that guilds had not ceased to perform these traditional functions of coin making and organizing production at the local level. In fact, organizing production at the local level is something which is getting all the more amplified during this period. And even law books do emphasize, law books of the Gupta period, contemporary to the Gupta period, do emphasize the amplified role or the increased role of the shrenis and the guilds, and they in a way advise the king to take notice of the role being played by these shrenis, and some kind of a policy to support it, to have some kind of a positive attitude towards their role. So it seems that craft and artisanal production, which had received a great fillip in the earlier period, in the post-Mauryan period, continues to thrive towards the beginning of the Gupta period. We get to have references of metal workers, garland makers, carpenters, potters, weavers, and so forth. So there is the role and the social bodies engaged in artisanal activities and craft activities also getting multiplied. But towards the later part of the Gupta period, or even in the post-Gupta period, there is a big change that is very much discernible. The case of the silk weavers migrating from Gujarat area to Malwa area, and there are similar stories coming from different parts of India towards the end of the Gupta period, where the artisanal activity and the craft activities which were usually centered around the cities are declining, and there is some kind of evidence of migration of these groups to rural areas. Maybe that they are with the declining fortune of towns and cities towards the later part of the Gupta period, these craftsmen and these artisans are finding it difficult to sustain themselves. They are not finding the market for their products, and hence they have to come back to their rural areas to in order to sustain themselves. And that is another component which is increasing the pressure on land. So it is not only the intermediaries, but also the migration of these artisanal groups who earlier stayed in towns and cities, and now they have to, under duress, they have to come back to the rural areas in order to sustain themselves. That is another fascinating change, which of course is beyond the realm of economy, and we should be discussing it in our discussion tomorrow, because that is centered around the social changes during this period. But the implication is that the artisanal activity which thrived towards the beginning of the Gupta period, by the time we come to the end of Gupta period, this trajectory of continuous upswing that we get to see ever since 6th century BC is declining, and there is a reversal, and people engaged in craft and artisanal activities are under duress, under the stress of not finding a market. They are moving back to the rural areas. Similarly, other literary references in terms of their connotative capacities, for instance, nigams. Nigams conventionally in ancient India would refer to towns and cities. Now, towards the later part of Gupta period, this term nigam came to connote a rural area, and that itself captures the story of this change, that there is perhaps you can say ruralization of economy and the landscape. So the terms which earlier were used in urban context or in the urban backdrop are now getting pervaded or are now being understood in rural context. So this is the important thing that we need to realize. Of course, there are factors behind this change, and that is what we shall come to by taking up the discussion on trade and exchange, which is the part of our next slide, as you can see. Now, trade and exchange is yet another component of economy, as you would understand it even in today's context. Now, long distance trade, which was a characteristic feature of the pre-Gupta period, that is post-modern period, is something that is getting disrupted around this time. A part of this disruption is on account of the disintegration of the Roman Empire, on account of the Germanic tribal invasions, and also on account of the Central Asian invasions, or as we understand it, the Huna invasions in the Gupta period itself here in India. So all these attacks are bringing about some kind of a disruption in long distance trade, and that is having some kind of an implication on economy that we shall soon be talking about. What it did, this disruption of long distance trade or the Roman trade, which was a characteristic feature of the earlier time, what it did is that high value transactions, usually transacted in terms of gold and silver coins, now that got ruptured. How do we know this? How do we infer this? Is by a systematic study, particularly by Professor R.S. Sharma. His proposition is that if we do a century-wise cataloging of the coins available in Indian history, then we get to see some kind of a progressive decline in the number of gold coins in the Gupta period. So, say 5th century, 6th century, 7th century, 8th century collection of coins that we have, if we count the number of gold coins, then it decreases. And what does it tell? It tells that perhaps high value transactions are not happening in the same frequency as it used to happen in the earlier period. And a major reason cited for this is the disruption of trade, long distance trade. At the same time, we also have some kind of an increase in the number of baser metal coins, say copper and protein and other non-costly alloys and so forth, so much so that even cowries, particularly in Bengal, are used in order to facilitate some kind of local exchange, or it could be barter kind of a thing. So there is some kind of a reversal of trend that we get to see. So increase in the number of baser metal coins and decrease in the number of high value coins like gold and silver is again symptomatic of a kind of a change that economy is registering in the Gupta period. And as we have already said, that another characteristic feature of the period, particularly towards the end of the Gupta period, is the urban decay. Most of the urban centers, which were thriving sites of trade and exchange and commercial activities or even production sites, they are undergoing some kind of a bad phase. The material remains attested through archaeological excavation of these cities are poorer, and the coins are hard to come by, particularly high value coins. And whatever coins that we get, even of gold and silver, they are somewhat debased coins. When we say debasement of coins, what it means is the actual gold content or the silver content of the coins is progressively declining. So, although the value of the coin is retained as the same, but in intrinsic terms, the gold content is declining, and it is sought to be substituted through other metals, maybe silver or other base metals. So that is again symptomatic of some kind of a stress on economy, which is a characteristic feature of the period that we are talking about. Now, what all these changes bring about is an overall ruralization of economy. The declining urban centers, the rupture of long distance trade, stress on part of the state to on account of Kali age crisis to generate revenue and so forth, all these changes are working together to some kind of a change in the economy, and which is leading to ruralization of economy and self-sufficiency of economy. Even if we read the travelogues of Fahian, who visited during the Gupta period, we find some kind of attestation of this, because he talks of some of the towns and their state in deploring terms, and that is yet another evidence which is furnished in order to drive home this point. And when we say self-sufficiency of economy or production, what we mean here is that in the absence of coins which could have facilitated long distance trade or even medium distance trade, in the absence of mobility, which is very essential for any kind of exchange economy, most of the production was probably now being done at the local level, and the consumption was also at the local level. So you tended to produce only what you consumed. So production for the market is minimal, and if goods don't enter market, then it can't revive exchange economy either. So it is this situation which is getting precipitated towards the end of the Gupta period in terms of trade and exchange. So what it does is that the urban focus, which was a characteristic feature of the earlier period, is now getting reversed, and it is the rural areas which are the sites of production and also the units of consumption now. So this is another kind of a change that we get to see here in the Gupta period. Now, monetization, as you can see on your slide, is something that we did discuss while talking about trade and exchange. Now, important for us to understand is that these exchange which are happening towards the end of the Gupta period is, it seems that primarily they are the goods of essential consumption, say salt, iron and so forth, which are locally available and which could be exchanged at the local level. But high value precious metal or say jewelry and so forth, which could have revived the urban aspect of the economy, that is very hard to come by in terms of evidence in the Gupta and post-Gupta period. Now, with the decline of urban economy, with the decline of long distance trade, with the advent of rural economy and self-sufficient economy, we have a different kind of economic scenario precipitating towards the end of the Gupta period, which the historians tend to understand and analyze in terms of a fascinating, rich debate amongst ancient Indian historians related to arrival of the feudalism. So, what is feudalism then? Feudalism, as you would know, is a kind of socio-economic setup in which there is absolute primacy of agricultural production, and there is a layer of intermediaries present between the ruler and the actual tiller on land, and they are the landlords with graded economic rights over land, and there is some kind of a centrifugal tendency. It works against centralized polity and economy and production. So there is some kind of a, you can say, alongside the parcelization of sovereignty, alongside parcelization of political authority, there is also production being organized at the local autonomous levels, and which is the kind of changes that we just discussed. So all these changes are supposed to be captured through using this term feudalism by one set of scholars, and the proponents of Indian feudalism would argue that perhaps earlier all these things were extremely centralized. So production was more centralized, polity was more centralized, and from Gupta period, particularly towards the end of the Gupta period and subsequent period, there is some kind of a fillip to the centrifugal tendencies. So autonomous conclaves of political authorities are coming to characterize the political map of India. Similarly, even in economy, we find that there is no huge centralized kind of production happening. Rather, it is in these small units, these small pieces of land that production is being organized. So all these changes are furnished as some kind of an evidence in order to drive home the point that Indian feudalism had arrived around this time by these historians. On the other hand, we have another set of historians who would not look at these changes from a you can say degenerative perspective. Rather, they would say that it is the new areas, as we had referred to in the earlier part of our discussion, where we said that agriculture, etc., they are now coming to characterize even Deccan and southern India. So new areas are experiencing for the first time agriculture and associated changes in a big way, and therefore the innate capacity of these areas to have their own state, local states, so to say, that is what is the political scenario here. And hence, the opponents of feudalism would say that the entire set of change should be looked at not from the perspective of some kind of a degenerative change from the past. Rather, it is a kind of regenerative. It is very much positive that these areas are also undergoing the kind of transformation which is usually associated with agriculture and peasant economy, and it should not be seen as some kind of a disintegration of the ancient Indian matrix of polity and economy. And therefore, the positive parts of this change in terms of new crops, in terms of new agricultural techniques, in terms of new irrigation methods, which come to characterize the organization of production and agriculture around this time, is argued by these historians as changes that should be looked at when we talk about the Gupta economy. Also important to understand is another tangent of the feudal debate, and that is to what extent it was the European model, classic West France model of feudalism that was there to be seen in India. And in this, historians do argue about the appropriateness of the feudal model to understand the Gupta economy or the post-Gupta economy, because there are quite a few very obvious differences. For instance, serfdom is something that we don't get to see in Indian scenario, or the kind of large state production, large state or large tracts of land being organized by the feudal lords as it happened in the European case. That is not to be seen in India as part of organization of production or agricultural production in this phase. So in the absence of these typical traits of feudalism, one set of historians also say that probably feudalism is not the appropriate label that we should be using to understand the late Gupta and post-Gupta economy. But the response to these is also very sophisticated, and it is said that these features are typical to the location and the historical circumstances of Europe. For instance, there land was not very much available. That is, uncultivated land was not very much available, and therefore serfdom arrived at some kind of intensification of the oppression of the peasantry or the tenants. But in India, in the presence of available uncultivated land, there was no such requirement there for this kind of a institution to emerge, or such institutions could not emerge, because if the level of oppression increases in a particular area as a result of the pressure on the same agricultural piece, then there was always this option for the tenants to move away and settle in a new area. Of course, that would not have entailed an easy life. Nevertheless, that option was always available. Therefore, there obviously are some very obvious differences in terms of characteristic features of the classic Western model of feudalism and the Indian feudalism, if at all we agree to this nomenclature. So that is by and large takes care of the discussion that we can have on the Gupta economy and the kind of changes that it underwent, the kind of changes that it triggered for the future period. And we do know that in the post-Gupta period, it is the decentralization tendencies, even in political terms, which were more prominent, and the coins, the absence of coins, paucity of coins is something which began around this time but continued well up to the 11th, 12th centuries or 10th, 11th centuries, and from there on we start getting the evidence of some kind of a revival. And by the time we talk of the Sultanate period and so forth, again there is some kind of a fillip on urban centers, or even before that in South India on account of several other religious changes, for instance emergence of the tirthas as the practice. Quite a few centers, tirth centers got transformed into urban centers. So temple-centered economy is something which again started altering the existing mode and social relations of production, but that was to happen much, much later. Remaining within the precincts of our discussion in chronological terms, all that we can say is that Gupta period, particularly the later part of the Gupta period and the post-Gupta period, is a very transformative phase in terms of economic changes, and these changes were deep rooted to the extent that for the next 4-5 centuries onwards, there was accentuation of these tendencies, this trajectory, and it could be altered much, much later with the coming up of urban-centered economy in a big way. But Gupta, so far as Gupta period is concerned, we should not only be misled by the usual association of the unusually high cultural attainments and the sculptural remains or the literary attainments of the Gupta period, and try to understand the economy as a direct correlation of these attainments. And that is why towards the beginning of our discussion, we did contest the Gupta appellation or dynastic appellation to the issue of economy, because cultural attainments and literary attainments could have happened despite this kind of slackening in terms of economy, in terms of rupture of long distance trade, in terms of inability of the royalty to extract enough surplus to sustain the state machinery, and all these could have led to some kind of a decentralizing tendencies which we talked about with reference to feudalism. So that is it about the economics and about the economy of the period under the Guptas.
So, as in when, if you talk about the Gupta period alone, as you talked about the, because of the agriculture also, the economy got a very good boost. Do you feel so that it maintained throughout this period? That is,
yeah, this is a good question that we usually tend to lose sight of. That despite this slackening of artisanal and craft activities and urban centers and high value coins and medium of exchange, one thing which did continue as uninterrupted, you can say, trajectory of change is the agriculture. And there is ample evidence of robustness of agricultural and expansion of agriculture to new areas. As we talked about in our discussion, increased number of the variety of seeds, variety of crops which were produced, and therefore the increased pressure on land is something which is not leading to some kind of an absolute rupture of agrarian system altogether. Rather, agriculture is or the Indian agricultural scenario is responding to it in a positive way. We have by the time we come to the time of the Harshvardhan and so forth and subsequent period, we start getting reference to quite a few innovative agricultural irrigation techniques, Aragatta and so forth, Persian wheel, introduction of Persian wheel and so forth. All these are symptomatic of agriculture being taken to in a big way in these new pockets where agriculture was not the mainstay of economy.
And if we talk about the economy as alone in context with the improvement of civilization, civilization was increasing. I mean, it was improving with the economy. Can we say that it was vice versa?
Well, to this question, I would, in historical terms, although in common language we tend to interchangeably use this word culture and civilization, but in historical terms, civilization stands for a particular phase of cultural developments where we have say scripts, where we have towns, where we have trade and commerce and so forth. So it's not as if they declined to the extent that there were no towns to be seen and so forth. So that situation of course did not arrive, but if we just take as examples, as kind of samples, some of the ancient towns and cities, for instance, say Patliputra, Banaras, Kaushambi, Hastinapur, or for that matter Indraprasth, that is Purana Kila and so forth. If you look at the vertical profile of these towns in terms of archaeology or the material evidence, of course, in the later Gupta and post-Gupta period, these towns did experience some kind of a pressure, some kind of a impoverishment of material prosperity is attested. But as I said that it was not all about the dynamics of economy, because the rural sites are the places where actual transformation is happening, and again in the subsequent period we have revival of these urban centers, but not during this period or the period of around 500 years succeeding the Gupta period. We have some kind of a stressful situation for towns and cities in ancient Indian history and early medieval history, and subsequent to that again they come back to life, and usual trade and commercial activity and exchange economy do characterize these urban centers subsequently. But during this period, of course, there was a modest patch, so to say, in the history of these towns.
Thank you, sir, for giving very deep insight into this very topic, and we learned a lot about how economy as a whole was made a point there in the Gupta period, which could be well predicted through the cultural sources. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for being with us. And Dr. Shankar would be tomorrow with us again also, and tomorrow we are going to discuss about the society during the Gupta period. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.